AI, Wild West, wasted time, and the best thing since sliced bread. I guess this is one of the questions that a lot of people are asking. Why should I even bother? Why really should I even bother? Today, what I really wanted to talk about is what the heck is it? Where are the opportunities and where are the risks? That's it. Okay. And specifically, what can you do literally tomorrow for your business, your organization, to perhaps take advantage of some of the low-hanging fruit? So, the question of why should we even be bothering with this? There's a huge number of reasons. Everyone's reason is a little bit different. Sometimes it's, gee, I just want to learn. Sometimes we could be faster to market. Sometimes it could make us better writers or faster writers or cost savings or improve service, or maybe we can get some good insights from the actual data and everything that we're doing. So these are some of the reasons why AI, are important. What I'd like to do though is more than anything else is start really with, well, how does it work? And I'm just going to spend a few minutes on how generative AI works, because I think that'll help us better understand, first of all, the opportunities, but also the risks. Essentially, what it does is it gets training data, it ingests huge amounts of data, like the entire internet or all the social posts that have been out there, scans of books and other kinds of data. All this data gets collected, and every one of these platforms collects different types of data, and it's different time frames and different sources and everything like that. So that's the training data. And then they apply an algorithm that the data actually helps generate to sort of say, okay, well, how is this data all connected to each other? And once we're able to do that, once it's done that, we can then ask that algorithm different questions. When we ask the various questions, and I know I'm probably speaking to people who already know most of this already, the algorithm says, aha, what's the first word that I should respond to? Then it says, what's the most likely word after that? The most likely word after that, most likely word after that. So it starts to string together its thoughts, but it's really more an algorithmic probability algorithm more than anything else. And there's some output. And then based on that output, you ask another question, and it once again uses probabilities and the algorithm to figure out what actually is going to be, what else is going to come. So that's how it works. Now, that's what you see. There's also something else that's happening in most of these platforms, is the prompts that you enter, whether it's documents you upload or questions or paragraphs or whatever it is, it gets reflowed right back into the system for future training data. Once it's got a huge amount of more of this future training data, they regenerate the algorithm so that the prompts later have greater data. Most people don't realize that their prompts in most of these systems will actually get used. And therefore, when other people ask their questions in later versions of it, it could very well be that some of the answers are based on what you've actually imported into it. Okay, so that's how generative AI works. And when I talk about generative AI, you've probably heard of ChatGPT, or in the United States, if you're watching this from there, Bard or Claude. Those are the textual kind of generative AIs. You type something, it has a conversation with you. There's also images, DALL-E 3, which is also driven by ChatGPT, or Stability or Midjourney. The way those work is you type stuff in and it'll create pictures, and then based on the pictures you can have this conversation. Well, make it more like this or more like that, etc., until you get this completely artificial construct that the computer has drawn in a particular style, for you, for whatever your needs are. Okay, now it could be look artificial, but also it could be photorealistic, as we'll see later on. So that's for text and images. And I know I'm very simplifying things, but the truth is there's a lot of tools, and they do an awful lot of different things. And to try and figure out what all these individual pros and cons are, it takes an awful lot of time. The actual truth is that there's literally hundreds and hundreds of tools. AI is like water. Every single piece of software out there is embedding AI into it, either themselves or by connecting up to various different platforms or to each other's and everything. And so very much like the beginning of the internet or the beginning of social media, where people are trying to get their minds around every single thing, okay, and we're wasting a lot of time while doing that, it's the very same thing with AI. The absolute wrong thing to do is to say, let me start at the top and look through all these different things. Now, if that's the way you want to do your screen time, for example, instead of watching Netflix or sports on TV, that's okay. But in terms of running your business and growing your business, this is not what I'm suggesting. The focus has got to be on the outcome, not the tool, which in most cases means higher profitability or greater engagement, improving sales, product mix, reducing costs, reducing complexity, etc. And for that, we can't start with the AI tools. What we have to start with is the model for actually growing the business itself. And I'll share one of them just to give you an idea how AI applies into it. And the model that we're talking about, is something that we've used for many, many years called the trust curve. Essentially, it says over time, relationships strengthen. Over time, relationships strengthen. At the very beginning, they have no idea who you are. And then they prefer you. Okay, then they test you out, the trial. Then there's a commitment. Okay, they're going to sign the contract, they're going to join the association, they're going to engage one particular way. You think about it. Think about, for example, when you bought a car. Okay, at the very beginning, you say, well, why do I need a car? Well, my old car broke, or my old car is too small, or it costs too much, or it doesn't suit my needs. So you say, I need something. Preference, you prefer, say, Toyota and a particular model. Trial is, let me go to the dealership and test it out. I'll do a test drive around the block, and commitment is I'll sign a contract. Same thing with respect to when you hire somebody. Gee, I need somebody. I'm going to advertise. I prefer this long list. Trial, that might be the interview, the short list, and then commitment, the job offer. Whenever a decision has to be made in business, often the trust curve can be used. The reason why I'm spending the time on it right now is because the whole question about, say, how you grow a business or how you move people up from awareness all the way up to commitment is based on whatever initiatives you have that drive awareness or improve preference or induce trial or cause commitment to happen. It could be a marketing initiative. It could be a particular type of content. It could be a particular type or use of technology. So each one of these things, if you think about right now what the organization is doing, likely it's doing it manually. An editor actually writes, or a writer writes, an editor edits, somebody else approves it. It goes through a whole bunch of particular workflow that takes a certain amount of time, a certain type of technology, a certain type of content, a certain marketing initiative, real world or online. Okay, but the question for AI is, using AI is, how might AI make a difference? How can it, for example, if you're doing advertising, come up with a whole bunch of different versions that you could test? Or how might it ideate on potential blog posts? Or how might it, for example, write an outline of certain blog posts, or actually write the actual post itself, right? How might it be used for data analysis? If we go through each one, the awareness, preference, trial, commit, we could think about how AI gets embedded within, and it gets embedded in for a particular task to achieve a particular objective. Now, I'm not going to go through every single one of the different things. There's many, many more under awareness, preference, trial, commitment than there are. But I want to point out that under each one of these things is data analysis. Because one of the things that AI is very good at is being able to take a huge amount of data and say, what does this mean? Are there any insights to be drawn? So, for example, you might give it a whole bunch of tabular data and get it to draw some insights based on it, or to make a heat map of the data in terms of where there's stuff and where there's not stuff. It just is really a question of your creativity and what you ask it to do with all this data, as opposed to asking, say, a human analyst as to what they can do. We'll come back to why this data analysis is so important in a few minutes. But the main point here is that we're not talking about using ChatGPT or any of the AI tools exclusively just for marketing, although it's very, very powerful. The trust curve answers the question for, how do we improve our productivity? How do we do things faster, or cheaper, or more creative? Now, if we think about, higher profitability, workflow improvements, like I just described using the trust curve, is one thing. But there's another area completely that most organizations do not spend time thinking about, which is transformation. How do we make sure that it's embedded within our strategic planning? Or how do we use ChatGPT or any of the other tools to do business risk analysis? or product development, or competitive analysis. How do we start to build the architecture, the data architecture, so we could build a private data store? So instead of using an external AI, for example, like ChatGPT or Bard or Claude or any of these other ones, we can actually query our own large language model, our own ChatGPT, and have it give results in specifically our competitive and our in our particular context. So this is where I think the huge benefit and possibility actually is. But it's a lot more than just, gee, well, I'm going to write a bunch of blog articles using ChatGPT. It's really more a question of strategically how we use it, and we're just starting to get to that particular point. Now, I thought to myself, well, how might we do it? If we were a food processor, and pardon the example, but it's a good one because it shows a very different kind of use than typical marketing and editorial. Let's say you want to decide you've got lots of barley. Maybe you run a barley operation, and you're trying to think about how might, as a food processor, come up with new product ideas. So what you might do is ask ChatGPT. So in you go and you type that in. Give me a list of 15 products that I could manufacture. And then it gives the answer, and you think, oh, that's pretty good. So then what's the next question you might ask? You might say, of the 15, which require the fewest additional ingredients? So ChatGPT comes up with 5 of them that have the fewest ingredients. Think about what ChatGPT has to know in order to answer this particular question. It needs to know about what's in all of these recipes, how many steps to do it. And it's been able to go through step by step and to say, aha, these are the 5. You then ask, list the ones that require the fewest steps to produce. And it gives you 3, including, puffed barley, which for whatever reason you might be interested in manufacturing. Then you ask, provide the specific steps to produce puffed barley cereal, including the recipe. Assume that I am producing commercial quantities for sale. And it gives the whole thing. Okay, I just cut it off there, but it goes on for a couple of pages. Who knew that making puffed barley cereal was actually so complicated, even though this was a simple recipe? So this is an example where you could use it for product development, for a manufacturer, a processor. But whether you're a not-for-profit, whether you're in financial services, whether you're a small business, whether you're just about any particular role, there's a place for using this along the way. Now, let me take a little sidebar here. And this is really where I want to dig in, actually, before we get back to the barley cereal. There's 10 risks that are actually quite important to recognize. We just went through this example, and let's see how many of these you might be able to pick out. Unintended leakage of IP. Think about it. I'm a food processor. I typed in, for example, I'm looking for all these ideas about barley. Well, a competitor, once that sort of gets through, might be able to winkle out, if I put a little bit more in, that in fact that this is something that might be on my R&D. This might be something that I'm doing. If I put in, for example, some documents that describe specifically parts of our business, okay, that would be leaking into the system, which would then be available for other people. There's a number of large organizations who said, staff, you're not allowed to use ChatGPT or any public one of these systems, just because our intellectual property has to be protected. And the only way we can make sure that happens is if we don't voluntarily upload it in the system. No permissions for training data. Very interestingly, on little old Randall Craig's website, randallcraig.com, I've been writing on business growth and strategy for decades and decades. And when a number of these tools decided to ingest all of the internet, they also ingested my site, okay, which, by the way, is got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of articles on it. Well, I didn't give permission. I didn't give permission at all, and I think that's a problem. There's a number of people, number of writers and authors and IP owners who are saying this isn't exactly right. It hasn't gone through the courts fully, but it's a problem. No attribution of source material. Let's just say that you actually go into ChatGPT or any of these other tools and say, give me whatever it is, and what comes back is stuff that comes from me. How do you know that it's coming from me, or whether it's something that's supposedly net new? Okay, there isn't net new, there's just recombined in different ways, right? So there's no attribution in the source material. When ChatGPT says such and such, you can't say, well, how do you know that? Right? Where do you actually see it? That's kind of where transparency comes in too. It's a black box. In we come, out we go. Just the other day, I spent some time looking at some other large language model software, which can be used in the corporate sense, that ingests all of your data, as well as some of the external data. And then when it comes back with the answer, you can click on it and it'll tell you exactly what the sources were from that large language model. So the problem can be solved, but right now with the public training data that's effectively being stolen, there's no way of doing that. Biased responses is something that's a little bit more insidious. Now you might say, well, one second here. We want to make sure that it's diverse and there's equity, inclusion, and we want to make sure it's actually even more basic than that. If you're ingesting all this data on the internet's got a bias with respect to typically younger male programmer sciencey types who've added all their stuff in there, and there is a bias that way. But how about all kinds of different people from different walks of life, okay? Not just gender, but also different cultures. How about people who are more artistic that might not have put as much in as people in the technical space? Whatever you ask it, it'll be answered through the lens of the data that actually built the algorithm in the first place. So looking for bias and unconscious bias on the part of ChatGPT or any of the other systems is actually an interesting challenge that is not going to be solved anytime soon. Hallucinations, that's a very cute way of saying lying, okay, where it makes stuff up. There's a famous case, a legal case, several months ago where lawyers' closing arguments, were made on citing several cases that actually never existed. The ChatGPT service he was using, they just made it up to sort of fit kind of the argument that was being made. That's a hallucination. A flawed conclusion, that risk is, okay, 1 + 2 + 3 = 37. Well, we know that doesn't make sense, but ChatGPT just probabilistically strings words together and concepts together, which may or may not actually be true. Incomplete answers is another one. You know, that recipe that I showed you, or those 15 different types of things? Well, how do you know that of the 5 that were easiest to make, how do you know those really were the 5 that were easiest to make? How do you know the 15, there wasn't number 16, 17, and 18 that were better? We don't know, but it looks good. It's incomplete answers. Number 9 and 10 actually are the toughest ones and the most important. Inaction. If you haven't done some quick experimenting or getting a sense as an organization as to what might be possible, you won't understand how to actually embed it, but you also might not understand what potential advantage one of your competitors actually has. You know, kind of reminds me when somebody said many, many years ago, I don't know about this telephone thing. It's going to ruin the social fabric of society. If I wanted to spend some time with somebody or speak to somebody, I would just get on my horse and go to their house and spend real time with them. We've had a variation of that particular argument when it comes to email, to using the internet, to mobile phones, to social media, and now we have that with AI. It's not that hard, and you could try most of this stuff for free. So I think that inaction is tough. Wild West and wasted time. I think this is a different kind of one. This is, you might recall when the internet and the World Wide Web first came out, everybody would spend hours and hours and hours and hours surfing. And just like there's so many of those AI programs that are out there that are so exciting to spend your time on, what's the connection to building your business or reducing the complexity or speeding things up or transformation or any of those things? They're not there. So I think that the risk here is that there's a lot of wasted time by people doing research as opposed to doing their jobs. And there's nothing wrong with research, but it needs to be a little bit more controlled. So those are the 10 AI risks that we've certainly identified. I'd like to move back to the world of puff barley cereal, which is, of course, something that we all know and love, and see where that takes us. The question here is, can we use it for packaging? You know, as a lawyer employed by the manufacturer, please write the product safety documentation. I know it's tough to read, but I'll read part of it for everybody here. This product, puff barley, is manufactured in compliance with industry standards and undergoes rigorously quality control, blah, blah, blah. Follow recommended storage and consumption guidelines. Individuals with allergies or dietary sensitivities should exercise caution. For specific inquiries or concerns, contact our customer support team. So that sounds very reasonable. But thinking through all those risks we just talked about, maybe there's something missing. Maybe like an ingredient list or nutrition or any of the other things that I've got there. The contact information, maybe not a bad idea as well. And so that, even if we've got something particularly, useful, it doesn't mean that it's an entire story. And in this particular case, packaging of a food product, there actually may be risk. Same thing in the healthcare world. Same thing with respect to a whole bunch of things where you might be required to disclose privacy or anything else. Okay, so this doesn't work, but we could ask another one. Specifically, what should be printed on the packaging? And there we go. We've got the list of 10 things that should be on the packaging. But, can we trust this? Should we verify? Should there really only be 8 and we don't need 2? Which 2? Should there really be 12 things on there? How about one jurisdiction versus another one? Okay, how about in French, if you're in Canada, or Spanish, or whatever the language is in the jurisdiction that you're actually in? Just because it says that it is, doesn't mean that it's so. But what it does mean is that we could likely short circuit in a dramatic way what we're actually going to be doing. And that's a bit of a competitive advantage. Okay, so we got the packaging. Let's say we've got it, the exact things. We've gone to legal counsel. We've got the marketers. Everything's all set here. The next thing we need, of course, is a product shop. So maybe we can use one of these services to do that. Okay, so I went, just because, why not? I went to Stable Diffusion, which is one that can make pictures. And I wrote, imagine a bowl of delicious puffed barley cereal with a few strawberries. And this is what it came out with, which, by the way, is actually quite beautiful. Okay, look at it's this portrait with the background is a little bit fuzzy and the focus is right on the cereal. And those strawberries actually look very good. Okay, and you think this is pretty good until you say, well, one second, is that actually what barley looks like? So I thought, why don't I go to Google, which is, also not very, is kind of a good place to look for things. I said, show me puff barley. And puff barley looks very, very different, actually, than what Stable Diffusion thought that it should look like. Okay, notwithstanding the fact that the strawberries look almost too perfect, excuse me, but there's a difference between these two. And the question is, well, how can you tell the difference in a real world situation? And maybe it's not so bad. And maybe what if the Stable Diffusion version actually looked a little bit more like barley? And it's true, you could iterate and it would get a little bit better and better and better and better. Okay. But if we rely only on this for our images, then there's all kinds of funny things that happen. By the way, if you wonder how to tell when something might have been AI generated or not, the answer is you can't. Okay, there's all kinds of programs that say that they can actually tell the difference, but it's a cops and robbers thing. As the AIs get better, and then the things that say, well, as the AI get better, and it's impossible to tell. But one of the things you can do is you can take a look very closely at any images. If you see an image of a person, for example, do their ears look different? Is there 5 fingers on the hand, or maybe 6 or 4? It's amazing some of the mistakes that some of these systems actually have. Are the length of their arms like unreasonably large or short, right? Is the size of their hand actually quite a bit smaller than one would expect for a person of a particular size? And what it means is that for us to tell the difference, if we wish to, is we've got to use our critical thinking skills. We can't just accept what comes out of an AI as something that's important. In a certain sense, the AI is the ultimate college intern, where you tell the college intern to do something, away they maybe they ask some questions, away they go, up, back they come, and it's a solid 60 to 80% effort. It moves you dramatically, but it doesn't sort of land the plane for you. Excuse me. So, eventually it won't be 60 to 80. It'll be, 70 to 90. It'll be 90, 95, etc. But we're not exactly there yet. Okay. So how do you move this to immediate action? And I've got two suggestions. Number one, I wanted to talk about the concept of rangers or scouts. Rangers and scouts are those people in the organization who are ranging further afield. They're actually experimenting with stuff that maybe you didn't even know about. You actually might be one of those rangers and scouts themselves. But sadly, sometimes rangers and scouts spend all their time experimenting and tinkering and fiddling and all that kind of stuff. And there's as much organizational learning that will happen with the tinkering and fiddling and experimenting that we have to say, okay, rangers and scouts, what we want to do is move from open concept experimentation to controlled experiments. And this gets back to how we actually build the organization in the first place. If you want to get more members, or if you want to increase sales, or if you want to reduce costs, set the AI task to be that. If you wanted to build an inbound marketing strategy and you wanted to come up with a calendar of blog posts, etc., that's the task. And you get the rangers and scouts to actually be doing that experimentation in a controlled way, where there's a beginning, middle, and end, and you could tell at the end, yes, this is actually working, or no, this isn't, let's move on. The second thing that I think is critically important right now is for organizations to actually take a look at their data and their data architecture. Because at a certain point, what we'll want to do is we'll want to use the systems that exist, okay, and the data that exists to connect with these public ChatGPT training data to get the best of both worlds. And yes, there's systems out today that seek to do that based on just your data, and there's some that have a connection to the the ChatGPTs and the Bards and all these other ones, but it's not completely there yet. It takes a time to build your data infrastructure within your organization. And by the way, it's been happening for so long. All the data that's been able to come from the web or social media or CRM or marketing automation or email systems or financial systems, the data is there. It's just not connected in a way which then can be harvested and used as your own training data. Now's the time to start that, at least start the conversation. So no additional systems are purchased without this kind of thing in mind, because it's going to be critically important. On the risk side, I think there's three things that have to happen as well. Probably the most important, whether you're just starting down this path or whether you're very mature, is to put together an employee AI acceptable use policy. This is a one-page document that helps spell out exactly what employees can and cannot do using AI. And it provides the rationale because they're going to do whatever they're going to do, sadly. So they've got to understand the why at the same time. We had this years ago with social media as well. Okay, but with the employee AI acceptable use policy, it means now the leaders are going to be able to say, okay, what you did there is not right. And the staff member will say, well, why? And then there's this conversation. Well, that's not right. What should happen is the staff should say, I don't think I should do this in the first place. I understand why. Okay, and gee, if I've got to make some changes, I need to make the case for it. It's not that it's a beforehand, not an after the fact sort of safety and risk mitigation measure. The second thing is when it does get used, every piece of output has got to be verified. Yes, you could trust it the same way you trust a college intern, but it's got to be verified. It can be verified in the real world with your gut, by Google searches, however it happens to be, but you can't say, because it came from this wonderful system, therefore all is good. And the third is to assess the risks, okay, and those 10 risks on the other page is really 9 plus the wasting time one. You literally can go through every single one of those ones step by step by step and saying, where's our exposure? What kind of training and education do we need to do? Where should we have controlled experiments to sort of suss out what this might be or the other? So those are the immediate action. What I wanted to do is I wanted to flip over to answer any questions. I should say that we had put together an AI resource kit. If you're wondering sort of how we get started, and it talks about training data, and it talks about acceptable use policies and lost opportunities. Here's the acceptable use policy for employees, and a whole bunch of other things as well. And afterwards, I could talk to you about that and sort of walk you through everything from that point onwards. What I'd like to do right now is open the floor for any questions or whatever. I've got a few more slides I'm going to throw up after this, but this is a part of the pop-up Q&A segment of today. And thank you all for coming, by the way. I certainly appreciate it, and hopefully you're learning a bit as well. So yeah, John.
So working for a big bank, I'm sure we have a whole department that is walking down the AI road to see how we can use it. But and I'm sure at the point in time, this bank, like every other bank, will adopt AI. But meanwhile, how does one make money at it? How do you as a consultant, or how does some little AI startup that tells the world they're doing AI, like, what's their revenue model? And maybe it's being invented on the fly because there is none. I don't know, but I'm just interested to know, like, how does one make money doing this?
Okay, that's a really, really good question. And so let me, and there's several different parts to the answer. Number one is there's some people who are in the plumbing business, right? They make the pipes and that sort of cause things to happen. For example, Google with their Bard, or OpenAI with ChatGPT, or there's a whole bunch of other companies that they just make the pipes, and their business model is very simple. You pay $20 or $15 or $10 a month, and you get access to this tool, which can then help you be more efficient. So that's how they're going to make the money. With respect to a lot of these SaaS products, software as a service products, for example, a piece of software that does SEO for websites, and many businesses use that. Well, what if they built AI SEO into their product, so their product was more effective at achieving its particular goal? That's kind of the second part of the answer. And pretty much everybody in the software space right now is sort of working on that particular thing, which is why there's so much out there. The third part of that is there's certain types of software that can only exist for the first time because of this. So, for example, there's software that I could be talking here in English, okay, and it can translate what I'm saying and move my mouth so that I'm speaking in Spanish or a whole bunch of other languages. And so that can create a video, and that video can then be broadcast using the system to a whole bunch of customers, etc. So there's some net new things that are happening because of this particular tool. And the fourth is really where the majority of companies can make money doing it. In some ways, it's a question of how do we become more, cheaper, faster, more creative by doing the things we're already doing. So fine, if you've got an inbound marketing program as an organization, you're punching out blogs and white papers and content and everything so that people can find you, just as an example. You could be a lot more efficient at doing that. And I've got a lot more to say about whether that's good or not, but that's certainly one way. You use it for ideation, for example. What's more exciting, frankly, is the idea of using this to actually change the nature of the organization or the industry itself. So, for example, that product, that barley product example I gave, if you're a food processing company, how many weeks or months of time would it take for somebody to do the research on all those different products and figure out which is the most efficient to produce and uses the least number of recipes and so on? I mean, this is just absolutely a massive time saver, and something that's core to, say, food processors, business. So I would, whether it's whether it's accounting firms or law firms or professional associations or small businesses, I think that if you start to say, how might our different, what if something, then how might our business be different if we actually incorporated that one way or the other? I think part of the problem is many businesses don't know what they don't know. And the reason why is they haven't been rangers and scouts out there sort of experimenting, or they haven't spoken to somebody like me or had sort of a bit of time to sort of ask and just bounce around the what if questions. I think sometimes management teams are rightfully very concerned about the risks. They say, nope, we can't do this. We can't do this. Or others are concerned about, hey, listen, we already have our day jobs. We just don't have time to actually be doing some of this exploration. All valid reasons. However, I'd suggest that you probably could have a net positive by having some efficiencies, which would then increase the amount of time where you can do some of that ranger and scout exploration, or you spend a couple bucks with somebody like me, okay, and shortcut it. Right. So those are the big answers to it. I'll also just add one other thing, John. And the one other thing is in your particular business, which I happen to know, which is all about which is as a financial advisor, there's some things that the big institution, the enterprise, can do, but you're actually running a small financial advisory practice that you have to work within, but you can also have a certain degree of flexibility in terms of what you do, right? It doesn't mean that, for example, every time that you do a market, you do some sort of market analysis, that you've got to take exactly what's given to you. Sometimes what you can do is you use ChatGPT and say, how do I make this into something that my such and such customers would understand more? How do I make it at a grade 7 level, not grade 10 level? How do I compress this into 2 paragraphs from my email? How do I expand this? And of course, you're not just going to copy paste it into whatever you're going to do, but it might save you a significant amount of time and be more effective as a communicator, just as an example. Another thing, if you're actually doing some of the stock picking, you might be able to use some of the tools that are out there to go across a huge chunk of the market and play being an analyst yourself. Why? You could use some of the systems to say, okay, what other stocks meet this kind of criteria? In the olden days, yeah, you can use specific searches on the various tools that say, I want EBITDA of this, and I want this industry, and I want this and this and this. But the wonderful world about AI has got fuzzy logic. So it may identify some which you may then want to check back with your analysts to say, okay, what do you think of this one or that one? Danny.
Thank you.
Just a couple of questions that maybe you can put some context to.
Yep.
So one would be, can you speak to the point where AI is still fairly limited in when I've asked AI to do things, they only have data leading up to 2021 or 2022. Yeah. So maybe you can touch base on that. And then secondly, what is your insight with respect to legislation and the use of AI? You've talked a little bit about privacy, and you talked about verification. Do you see any of that because of the wild west syndrome that you've talked about? Because I find that right now that's where we are. Do you see that that's going to be helpful or hinder those that are wanting to move forward with the AI implementation in their businesses?
Okay, boy, that's a lot of questions, but they're really good ones, actually. First of all, with respect to the issue of the date and, is it January of this or September of that, etc. It's just a question of they had to put something in place to sort of start it, and there's already discussion of a number of different platforms that are actually full-time connected at all times to the internet and are constantly, continuously ingesting, right? So I don't know if they redo the base model and the algorithm, every time. Just the other day, for example, Elon Musk has said, well, he's going to be putting out an AI in the next period of time that is, first of all, no guardrails, number one, and number two is instantly, continuously attached. So it'll be able to comment on things that are in conversation in the news right now. I think the question about Bard and OpenAI being live to the internet is an interesting thing, because I'm not sure whether the whole up-to-date internet, and I could be wrong on this, Roy, you can correct me, is actually connected to the actual training data, or whether it's just able to pull data from it. And that's a difference, because if you pull data from it, that's good. That brings you up to date, but it doesn't form. The actual ingested data is what helps build the more robust algorithms. So, well, it's true. What's the difference between a ChatGPT 3.5 and 4? It's the difference between 175 billion data elements and 280 billion data elements, and therefore the model is a little bit more robust. We can argue on this one till the cows go home. All I can say is that we're moving to there fast. With respect to the issue of regulation, this is a really interesting one, because whether it's the what the big platforms in the United States have signed, or whether it's I'm talking about the voluntary code of conduct, or whether it's what's happening in Europe right now with the EU's regulations, or where I'm based in Canada, which is the Bill C-27, the Digital Communications Implementation Act, etc. There's a couple things. First of all, there's a big argument that's being made amongst in the AI community that, these codes of conduct are designed to lock out innovators and lock in the big players. And I think that there is some argument to that. I also think that we got to have some code of conduct, otherwise we're going to have problems. I also think that the problem with voluntary codes of conduct is that the bad actors, whether it's the bad state actors, Russia, Iran, North Korea, those kinds of organizations, or organized crime, whether they in fact, with their platforms, will actually hew to this or not. And it's kind of hard to tell exactly whether they will or they won't. I think where it's going to be an important thing is what is the impact on public trust in the platforms. So, for example, my newsletter that just went out today talked about the junkification of the internet, and it proposed that there be a way that people self-identify the content as being AI derived or zero AI or 100% AI, just at a certain scale. But even that kind of idea, if it ever took off, how do you know people would actually abide by that? It's a bit of cops and robbers with respect to, well, you know what, the platforms, I've tested a bunch of them, the claim to determine whether something's AI or whether it's not AI is that gets good, and then guess what, the platforms get better, and so on and so forth. And just like we've got a spam, anti-spam kind of cops and robbers going on forever, in a certain sense, I think that it's a bit of a mugs game trying to use a program to determine whether it is or is not. It all boils down to what the public trust is, and I think there's a connection to brand at the very same time. If somebody's brand is known as fill in the blank, and the AI is able to grow that and extend that brand to where it needs to be, that's one thing. And same thing with the impact of innovation. If it turns out that the end user, whether it be some supply chain thing or a general public or prospects, customers, if the trust is high, it's good. And regulation can help, but it doesn't guarantee that people are safe, or that they suddenly will not delegate their safety to somebody else, and therefore put themselves on, at risk.
If we're a very data-rich company, but we haven't had AI involved, are you at more risk if you started coding for AI to start extracting information and cutting and splitting and dicing the information? Are you at risk? Is the organization at risk of that information going public or being available to others that you would you want to ensure that you've got some security around it that is only being used for the association as opposed to being shared to the World Wide Web.
Okay, so shared to the World Wide Web versus shared sort of via, one of these models out to other people are different things, because you could post something on the web, it's available to everybody. It's kind of like an indirect kind of thing. What I would say is this: if you've got a lot of data and that's a very good thing. What you can do as an organization, beyond putting an employee AI acceptable use policy in place, you could also insist that anybody who does use this platform use one of the services that specifically does not use your prompts for future training data. So, for example, OpenAI, they're just about to announce an even bigger upgrade to what you currently pay for, where they guarantee that's not the case. It's kind of right now, but this is going to be something that's more and more and more important. So yeah, you can pay to prevent that from happening, but most people don't even know that it's a thing, right? So it's an issue. A minute, Jackie, you had your hand up. What do you have to say? And it's nice to see you, by the way.
Thank you, Randall, and it's nice to see you too. My question really is kind of similar to Danny's, but you talked about IP and protection of IP, and how does one put the fence up to stop that from happening, that your IP is being used by the systems to help someone else? Like what you do, I can go in, find out what you've got on your web, and it learns from you, and then I can repackage it. How do we stop that from happening?
So yeah, so it's kind of like, kind of to hold water in your hand. The tighter you sort of go like this, the more it sort of squirts out everywhere. So there's a couple things. Number one is the whole importance of actually recognizing that IP has got value in and of itself, and making sure that there's organizational processes to make sure, okay, that things that are proprietary and shouldn't be shared actually remain that and not shared. And things that should be shared, for example, to members, those could be, but things outside, no, not at all, right? So part of it is training. Part of it is having that, and it's more than just an AI employee, standards or anything like that. It's also a question of acceptable use policy. It's also a question of realizing that it goes to IP as well. Next is to say, okay, well, let's make sure if we're using these AI tools, we make sure we sign up for and pay for ones that promise not to actually take our stuff down, not to use our stuff. Unfortunately, with respect to things that are already on your website, you can use a robots.txt file. It's a little technical sort of file where you can say, don't. Sorry, you're not allowed to take our stuff. But that suddenly usually has an impact of you not being able to be found, or the data not being found on the internet, right? So that's kind of, there'll be better movement in what can be in the robots.txt file, but I assure you that any of the bad actors out there will be ignoring it, right? In my particular case, what happens is when they ingest all the data, they create, they tokenize it, as it's called, and then they use these tokens inside, to make the algorithms and to query and all that kind of thing. So in my particular case, I guess the Washington Post a few months ago did a fascinating analysis. They took an entire data set, okay, that was used for one of the AI systems. It wasn't ChatGPT, it was one of the other big ones. And this data set of like everything on the internet as of a particular date, okay, they wanted to know for every single website out there, okay, how many tokens were actually used. And let me rank these, from 1 to like 10 million, all the different sites. Lucky me, okay, I was ranked number 83,000 out of some 10 million, which is nice. I've got lots of content and everything, but I'm the chump because they took all that content and they're reforming it and taking it, and it's available to anybody with zero attribution, zero zero permission, zero licensing. Without my, so it's a bit of an issue. Once it's out, it's out. Okay. And you could try and claw it back, but it's very, very, very difficult to do so. The most important thing is to make sure from a governance perspective and some of the process perspective that the organization understands, and number two, that it's actually got process in. So Roy, you made a comment in the chat, taking it, it's really more learning from it, really, a bit like a library. Okay, and you know what? It's a very interesting. We've got a social contract in society. We all pay our taxes. The library can buy a bunch of books. Then we can go in as citizens and get a library card, and then we can take everything, and we can learn from what's in the library. And then when we write our essays, remember those from university and college, we had to have this little bibliography, and we actually had to attribute everything. There's a number of copyright standards organizations that write a check to all the authors, including me, by the way, for public use in libraries of our material. So I got my check just a couple of weeks ago, right? So there is a parallel to it, but it's a convenient one that we have to sort of look at the whole thing. I think the jury's out. Pardon my pun.
So do you get it for a quotation, like a direct citation, or do you get it for a bibliography versus a footnote, I guess is what it comes down to. So at the moment, it's a bibliography. If it's a footnote, if it's quoting you directly and not attributing it to you, I concur. If it's a bibliography, it's like, here's all the books I read to create my new thing.
So
do you get a check for bibliographies?
So I get a check based on my share of the IP that's out there. And because I happen to be prolific and I've got like 8 books or so, the check's not nothing, right? So I guess what I would say is this. The Google Scholar, which is Google's website with all the academic treatises, one of the things that it's done is it's been able to, if people aren't familiar with it, is they connect all the authors, and there's sometimes 24 authors on a particular paper together, so you can actually see where a paper has been cited and who's connected to each of them. It's a fascinating way to build detailed knowledge on scientific and any college level refereed paper. And in a certain sense, it's become the de facto sort of norm. And university professors, that's not a profit-seeking kind of enterprise, but they do, their reputation is determined specifically by how often their papers are cited, or how often they've actually written papers, and so on and so forth. There is no such mechanism for anybody else who's out of academia. And I don't know what the answer is, Roy, to tell you the truth. All I can say is that we're in a period right now of vast Wild Westism, right? And much the way, for example, the world is woken up to the value of our personal data in social media and the use thereof by Facebook and Google and others, I'm thinking that we need to also be a little bit more proactive as organizations with respect to what it means for our data. Yeah. So let me just looking at the time right now. Let me just say I can stay here for another 15 minutes if people want to chit chat. I'd love to do so because I could talk about this all day, and I do actually. I'm a professional speaker and a consultant and coach to organizations on this kind of stuff. But really the question really is the low-hanging fruit. Each of you come from a very, very different space and have very, very different roles and responsibilities and are connected to very different places. My question is okay, so what are you going to do with this information? Is it okay? The organization I'm connected to, this is what we got to do: employ AI acceptable use policy. Or is it to ensure that anything that comes out is actually verified, not just trusted, or the risks? Or is it the issue of how do we start building our data architecture and move from the Wild West to controlled experiments? That's really the question. If you are interested in our AI resource kit, it's available out there, and the QR code, let me just go here. braintrustinstitute.net/FCC50, and there's a half price if you guys want. And I'll just make an offer to everybody on this call. If you want to do an Ask Me Anything or just discuss about this privately about your organization, you can actually book a meeting with me by just looking going to this URL using the QR code. So I wanted to thank everybody for joining, and I appreciate all of your insights. I'm going to say thank you and close the formal part of the meeting, but I'm going to stay on here and talk for as much as you guys would like if you're interested. So if you'd like to join, if you'd like to stay, please do so. Otherwise, hopefully we'll connect either directly or some other time.
I have to go, Randall, but thank you so much for doing this and rescheduling it. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Good information.
Thanks, Randall.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Randall. I found that very informative.
My pleasure. Thank you, John. Be well.